From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana.
It was an icy winter's day when I drove all the way to the New Forest to go and knock on the door of the family of Catherine Hickman. Catherine died almost 16 years ago in a fire at Lakanal House in London that was at the time the biggest tower block fire in Britain. I didn't have a phone number for her parents, but I did manage to find their address. So I drove up this long little track to their farmhouse and knocked on the door, and Catherine's mum opened, Flo, and I said, I found new information about the cladding that spread the fire in which Catherine died. And she said, I better call my husband, and invited me in.
The word cladding entered the public lexicon after the horrific fire at Grenfell in 2017, which claimed 72 lives. 3 companies involved in the tower were found by the public inquiry to have engaged in systematic dishonesty. The companies deny this, but the cladding problems didn't start or end at Grenfell. As one campaigner put it, this is becoming Britain's biggest corporate scandal. The Sunday Times can now reveal that a 4th company, Trespa, used misleading safety information to sell its cladding, including to the builders of Lakanal House, where in 2009, Catherine Hickman, at the age of 31, was killed by the fire which ripped through the building. Her flat was fundamentally unsafe, and yet, after her death, thousands more just like it were built. The story today: the cladding catastrophe in Britain.
I'm Martina Lees. I'm a property writer for the Sunday Times.
Martina, you were describing that day when you had to drive to the parents of Catherine Hickman's farmhouse for a visit they weren't expecting and to tell them more about their daughter's death. What did they tell you about Catherine?
Well, they all gathered around at the kitchen table, Pip and Flo, Catherine's parents, and they called Catherine's sisters, who both lived nearby, and they came to...
Oh, she's our older sister, and she's lovely.
She was a nice one. She was the best one to mum and dad. I never get in any trouble. I never got caught doing anything, and but she was just... she's just really good. Like, she's just, she's like the best sister, wasn't she?
She had such a nice group of friends.
Nothing was too much trouble.
No.
Then they showed me their family albums of Catherine growing up, riding a horse, Mary Legs, and driving tractors on the farm.
They were all upstairs. So driving the tractor.
Oh, this is okay.
Well, I wouldn't recognise her there, let alone... That's when she was a girl. Right there.
And then fashion design drawings that she made before she left to work in New York. She designed for the singer Bjork and...
Wow, so a very successful fashion designer.
Yes, she was, flying in her way. And then she came back to London and worked in boutiques there.
Oh, there's Catherine in the shop by the look of it.
Oh, yeah.
Wearing one of the creations, probably. And the vintage creation.
Was what was her style? Was it quite vintage kind of her designs?
Yeah, quite
vintage
eccentric as well.
Yeah.
Like
Like she
Off the wall, shoes as well.
She
It's
came
funny
and met
shoes.
me from the train station at Waterloo, and one summer got off the train, and I saw her walking towards me, and I was like, "You've got Mum's wedding evening dress on, you know, the green one with the sunflowers."
Oh, this one, yeah.
Yeah, that one.
She was like, "Yeah, I love it." And I was like,
I wore that. I bought that for my
Catherine
wedding.
redesigned these amazing vintage dresses, and she found love with a celebrity hairstylist, and then together they moved into Lakenal House, which is a tower block in Camberwell in South London.
And Martina, what happened to Catherine?
On a hot Friday afternoon in July 2009, she was working from home. Her boyfriend was away in New York, and then a fire started lower down the building from a faulty TV.
When we heard about the fire and we're going up there, I was thinking, oh, I better take her some clothes because she might be had to evacuate and I'm just trying to find stuff.
It spread up the facade via the cladding and burned through the window cladding on Catherine's flat.
When we got there, we spoke to the policemen and they said,
they're like
yeah,
at the end of the street, like, you know, they were stopping people going up.
So it was
And I said,
horrible.
"Oh, we're trying to get to our sister, give him the flat number."
Yeah,
and
and
he
his-
took us to the police station
his
straight away.
face just dropped,
He knew.
didn't it?
Yeah.
And
And then I spoke to Dad, and you said, "Prepare yourself for the worst." And then we walked in, and they told us.
Within 33 minutes after the fire started, she was dead. The fire spread further to the flat next door, and it also spread down the building. 5 more people died sheltering in the bathroom of the flat next to Catherine's, 2 mothers and their 3 children. Both their husbands lost their entire families, and they had to watch from outside, having taken frantic calls from their wives. It was the biggest tower block fire in Britain at the time. The thing to understand is that buildings are meant to be built in a way so that a fire in a flat will not spread rapidly beyond that flat. That's not what happened at Lakenal House. A faulty TV on the 9th floor ignited, and an hour and a half later, 6 people was dead because that fire spread via the cladding up the facade into Catherine's flat, and then through internal defects to the flat next door. It also spread down the building through falling debris, which ignited more flats, which created smoke, which spread through the ventilation ducts that was connected to the same bathroom where the 2 other women and children were sheltering, and which the smoke killed them.
And it seems to be the cladding that helped this fire to spread. We've talked a lot about cladding in the last few years since Grenfell, but just remind us, what is it?
Cladding is what goes on the outside of a building to protect it from the weather. It normally is installed on top of insulation, and you can make it from many different things. This cladding was what's called high-pressure laminate, or HPL for short, made by a company called Trespa, which is in the Netherlands. And it is made of wood and paper fibre and plastic resin that is, condensed together at high heat and pressure.
So this is, as you said, high-pressure laminate cladding from a company called Trespa. We'll just call it cladding from now on. Tell us what you've managed to find.
So we found that Trespa marketed this type of cladding with misleading safety information. This cladding is on many buildings throughout Britain, and many of them have been found so unsafe that the cladding is being stripped off. And that is costing taxpayers hundreds of millions of pounds. One of those buildings was the Cube, a student block in Manchester, which had a devastating fire in 2019, which was spread by the cladding and very nearly killed more people. We've also found that Trespa's accounts shows no record that it's paid to take any of this stuff off buildings.
So This is not just a historic problem. We know that Catherine died in a flat which had this cladding, and it clearly seems to have contributed to the fire spreading, but there are still buildings right now in this country using this cladding.
Yes, HPL and trespass HPL specifically is a very common type of cladding. It is not necessarily unsafe in itself, but if it's used in an unsafe way, it is. And in many of the cases I have seen, it was used in an unsafe way, and we are all paying to take it off.
And in the meantime, people living there are still at risk.
They are.
Tell me about how you went about investigating this. I know you've been doing it for a while. Just give us a glimpse of your methodology.
This has been a 6 months investigation. Peter Apps, who wrote a book about Grenfell, helped me with it. We have looked for safety certificates, test data, and marketing materials used to sell and fit this type of cladding. We made a lot of freedom of information requests to find documents used to market and then fit trespass cladding. We dug out evidence in among over 300,000 documents that was disclosed by the Grenfell inquiry. We searched the internet, we spoke to people who work in the industry. It has been a long road.
And you mentioned Grenfell just now, and Peter Apps has obviously done a lot of work on it, and you did a huge investigation on it, but this is not the cladding that was used there. This is cladding that was used on other buildings.
Yes, trespass cladding was not on Grenfell, but it is on a lot of other buildings.
And tell us a bit about this company, Trespa. Who owns it?
Trespa is majority owned, ultimately, by a secretive family of Dutch billionaires, the Van der Vorms, led by Martin van der Vorm, who's 66 and lives in Monaco. They own it via several layers through their publicly traded trust, HAL. The Van der Vorms is the second richest family in the Netherlands with 8.6 billion euros, according to a Dutch magazine called Quote.
So that's the owners of Trespa. They create cladding, which, as you've described, is what protects buildings from the elements. And it's made, as you said, of wood and plastic, all things that are very, very flammable.
Yes, it's combustible. But whether or not it will rapidly spread fire is affected by how the cladding is installed on a building. It is also a lot more risky if you put it on a tall building where it takes longer for people to escape in a fire. So it is the responsibility of the designers, the builders, and the building owners who use cladding to meet building regulations. But they do so by relying on information and test results from the cladding manufacturer. Manufacturers don't legally have to prove their cladding is safe, but it's commercially essential. And without that, almost no one would buy their cladding.
Yeah. So how did Trespa go about proving that their cladding was safe?
So first of all, Trespa makes its cladding in two versions, a standard version and a fire retardant version. So the standard type is cheaper, and it was the standard type that was on Lakenal House. Both types, standard and fire retardant, went through fire tests in Belgium. You pay a test house, a company, to run those tests.
Basically, set these things on fire.
Yes.
See how they burn.
In a specific installation.
Yeah.
So, and then Trespa sent the results to another company and pays them to award a certificate based on the test results. So the standard cladding was rated Euroclass D, and the fire retardant cladding was rated Euroclass B.
And for people who aren't in that world, is that a good rating?
Both still burn. B is okay. D is not great. The scale is from A1 to F, and where F is the worst.
Right, but both still burn.
But there's a crucial caveat for both Euroclass ratings. They only apply if the cladding is paired with non-combustible insulation or no insulation, because that is the way it was tested. If you put it on top of combustible insulation, the ratings are not valid. Also, In the case of the standard cladding, there was another requirement. It could never comply if it was fitted on a building that is taller than 18 metres, which is about 6 stories in Britain.
So, Martina, this is all getting quite technical, but just to recap, there are 2 types of cladding made by Trespa: standard cladding, fire retardant cladding. Both of them went through tests, received ratings that only apply when they're paired with non-combustible insulation. That's when that rating is meaningful. And for the standard cladding, there's a whole other requirement for it never to be applied to buildings taller than 6 floors. Both of those requirements don't seem to have been upheld with Lucknell House. Lucknell House was much taller than that, and it doesn't seem to have been fitted with non-combustible insulation.
Yes, it was 14 stories. So it should be said that there was no legal obligation in the UK on Trespa to highlight this caveat, but it would turn out to be a matter of life and death. If cladding is used with combustible insulation, as it was on Lucknell House and also at the Cube in Manchester, it burns voraciously.
So, Martina, let's try and work out how so much of this cladding has been applied to buildings across the country in the wrong way, in ways that make it even more dangerous in a fire. I assume when you're about to apply cladding to a building, if you're the person constructing it, you must be given a certificate or something that just points out some of the caveats that you were talking about earlier that would make it less safe.
If you're a responsible designer or installer, you want to check the paperwork of this product. And on the European technical documents for trespass cladding, it doesn't say it in red or bold, but it does have the insulation caveat on there. So Trespa was well aware of it. However, that was never on the safety certificate that Trespa obtained from the British Board of Argument, the BBA, which applied in Britain from 1999 until 2023.
So is that the certificate that construction companies in this country would have seen, that planners in this country would have seen?
That is what people would look at here, yes.
So why is it that if you look at the European documents, you've got these caveats very clearly set out, and yet here, no mention of them when they could have such a catastrophic impact?
The truth is, we don't know. Did Trespa leave it out when they submitted the test results to BBA? Or did Trespa include the caveat and then BBA left it out and Trespa didn't correct them? I haven't been able to answer that question. I asked very specific questions to BBA about which documents Trespa gave them, and they wouldn't say because it's confidential, and they referred me back to Trespa, who wouldn't
tell you either, I imagine. I mean, you'd assume if you were the BBA, and there's so much riding on this, you'd want to see the certificates yourself from Europe. I mean, is this partly the fault of the BBA?
There's definitely some concern about the role of certifiers like BBA. Around the same time, between 2007 and 2014, BBA accepted misleading wording on its certificates that was dictated, quote, by 2 dishonest manufacturers, Kingspan and Arconic, who made panels for that was on Grenfell Tower. And BBA failed to verify fire test results, which the 2 had misrepresented or concealed. And these were findings from the Grenfell inquiry, which also condemned BBA's incompetence and ingrained willingness to please manufacturers which had paid it for certification. And this is a quote from the Grenfell inquiry's final report. We have no reason to think that the shortcomings we discovered in those certificates and the way in which they had been issued were confined to those particular cases.
I mean, that sounds quite damning for the BBA.
Yes, but there is something we can prove about Trespa's role in this. For some 20 years, Trespa failed to tell UK buyers about the insulation caveat in its own marketing. In extensive searches, we could not find any UK marketing material where Trespa disclosed it, and we've looked at brochures, datasheets, magazine articles published between around 2000 and as recently as this year.
So despite knowing that this cladding had these essential caveats which meant it would only be as safe as the certificate stated if it was applied in a particular way, Trespa doesn't mention that in any of their marketing. It's not mentioned on the BBA certificate. So if you're a construction company, if you're building a tower block, you're buying cladding, nothing there tells you that it can't apply if it's more than 6 stories high or if it's being applied with combustible insulation. You just wouldn't know.
Yes.
So going back to Lacknell House in particular, where Catherine died, there was a police investigation after the fire. What did they find?
There was a 3-year police investigation into potential manslaughter at Lacknell House. And during that, Trespa's UK boss, David Lang, made 3 statements to detectives. He told them that Trespa made its cladding in both the standard and the fire retardant grades. And then he sent officers as confirmation of fire test data, to quote from his statement, the BBA certificate, which we now know did not have these crucial caveats on it. The Crown Prosecution Service eventually decided that no criminal charges would be brought over the Lacknell fire.
Ah. And is there any evidence that Trespa was aware before that fire took place that this cladding was being installed in a really dangerous way?
Well, Trespa's sales representative got an email in 2005, which was later read out at the inquest into the Lacknell fire, which told him that it is a 14-storey high-rise building. Then he visited Lacknell House in January 2005 to talk about the use of Trespa on the balconies.
So this is long before that fire took place?
Yes. And then he visited it again the next year in October in 2006, and he was told that Trespa was also going on the composite window panels.
So you couldn't miss that this is a 14-storey building. This is not a 6-storey building.
It was clearly above the 18-metre cutoff for when the standard Trespa, which was what was being installed on there, was compliant. But what happened after the fire is really significant. For the next 9 years, Trespa kept marketing this cladding with the BBA certificate that did not have these crucial pieces of information on it. And over that time, it went on to many buildings where we are now all paying to take it off from. So I have reports detailing what's on quite a few buildings, about 1,700 flats between them, with Trespa cladding on, which is being taken off at taxpayers' expense. And in almost 80% of those cases, the Trespa cladding was fitted with combustible insulation, which meant the fire ratings were invalid. And at the Cube in Manchester, where there was this huge fire in 2019, we have a paper trail showing how designers actually looked at this misleading BBA certificate when deciding to keep that cladding on the building after Grenfell. And when the fire happened, it very nearly killed a woman. She was on the 6th floor and a fireman went up there with a long ladder to get her out of the window, and literally seconds later the fire was bursting out of her window where she was just standing.
Wow. And Martina, I mean, when you've gone to Trespa with all of this during your investigation, I mean, what do they say?
So we went to Trespa with the longest email I've ever sent to anyone about allegations that we intend to publish in the Sunday Times. We asked very specific questions, including why the key caveats on the insulation and the height restrictions was not on Trespa's own marketing material or its BBA certificate. This is what they came back with. TRESPA says it makes products, and it is their responsibility to provide clear information about the properties of their products to allow decision makers to choose how to use it at their own discretion. And that information is available on their technical website. TRESPA says it does not make, sell or test facade systems of how their cladding is used in a wall combined with other materials. And they also do not make sandwich panels that combines a thin sheet of their cladding with a core of something else. How to use it is the responsibility of decision makers like architects, specifiers, facade engineers, and the tragic incident at Lakanau House emphasizes this responsibility.
And Martina, what about the BBA? What do they say about their certificates that fail to mention some of the conditions under which the cladding would be safer?
The BBA stopped certifying TRESPA's cladding altogether in 2023. It would not explain why. BBA says its certificates now include complete test results as well as comment on what it means for compliance. It says TRESPA's certificate is from an era when BBA did not add interpretation and is supported by fully accredited reports, quote, which are confidential. According to BBA, insulation was independently restricted, so it was not considered necessary at the time to include a statement about it.
Martina, standing back, you said earlier that this cladding is still being used on many buildings across the country, many of them in a very unsafe way. Do we have any idea of how many flats in the UK are still in danger?
Up to 700,000 people were living in flats with fire risk, and as many as 3 million couldn't sell their homes because they couldn't prove that the buildings were safe. So no lender would give them or their buyer a mortgage. Today, only 12 to 16% of buildings known or estimated to have fire risks have been fixed. So that means up to 550,000 people are still in danger. In some cases, developers or taxpayers are paying to fix those buildings, but there's still people who face uncapped bills to fix their buildings because they are excluded from protections in the law that has come in recent years.
And none of this is being paid for by TRESPA?
No.
Martina, take us back to the Hickman family, where you started this story. How has life been for them? How are they finding the results of your investigation and watching what's happened?
The Hickman family says that Catherine was the biggest shining light, and they always felt that her death was preventable and that she died in vain.
If her death wasn't in vain and the inquest said, right, you've got to put in sprinklers in buildings, you've got to make sure the cladding's safe, things like that, and other fires didn't happen like Grenfell, it wouldn't be so bad. But not only do we not get any justice for Catherine, but other people have died now from other fires, you know, with the same outcome. And like Dad said, it'll probably happen again if there's 600,000 people whatever still living in that, it's bound to happen again.
They feel they still haven't had justice for her. And now more people have died at Grenfell, and lots more people are still in danger.
That was Martina Leese, property writer for the Sunday Times. Believe it or not, there is so much more to this story that we couldn't quite fit into the podcast. If you want to read the full investigation, head to thetimes.com, and we'll put a link in the description of this podcast. This episode was produced by Taryn Siegel. The executive producer was Molly Guinness, and sound design and theme composition were by Mal Lassetto. If you have any thoughts on what you've just heard, do drop us a line to thestory@thetimes.com. Thanks for listening. See you again soon.